Obviously, great progress being made on the project overall, on time, on budget, as I noted, and we're looking forward to giving the board a full tour of the alignment at your next briefing. I also just wanted to address, with the help of General Counsel Janet Tran, the legal discovery issue that was identified in the paper. And this was actually associated with a liability case that has been filed and actually will go to trial shortly. So there's not a lot that we want to say about it, but I would just come to the board and say that we have complied weeks ago, actually, with the judge's order associated with producing documents. And indeed, some of the details associated with the production of that order, those documents did change over time. And we have fully complied and satisfied the judge at this point in time in terms of the documents that he wanted to see associated with that trial. But I'm certainly not the expert in that, but there is one sitting to my left, and I would offer the opportunity for any questions that you have on that.
Right. I don't really have a lot to add to that, but I do want to point out that from the very beginning of this case, that trimet accepted liability for the actions of the negligence of the operator, and that we have always been willing to meet our legal obligations in the case. So there's never been a question about that. And we provided 30,000 pages of records, and the court did require us to conduct another search, and that resulted in 600 pages. So we're talking about 2% of all the records that we produced in the second go-around, and only 2 of those documents were used by the plaintiff in the case. So it's not that trimet is at all trying to avoid producing records, but I will say that we do not really have the capacity to do electronic searches. And when we told the judge that we didn't have that capacity and that it would take us 34 days to do the search that the plaintiffs requested, the court relieved us of that obligation. So if you have any questions about the process, I'm happy to answer that. But I will say that we have complied with all legal requirements.
I have no further questions right now. Any others from the board? Okay, thank you for addressing that. I appreciate it. Please continue.
Just really one other item that I wanted to cover, which is that actually it slips my mind right now. So I'll have another chance at it as we go through. But with that, I conclude my remark, and we will come back a little bit on the TVM report later.
Okay. Any questions that aren't of the general manager? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Director Prosser for an update on the Finance and Audit Committee.
Right. Board member Schweitzer, as chair of the committee, couldn't be here today, so I'm giving the report in her place. We last met on May 8th. The primary focus of the meeting was to go over the approved budget and some changes that staff has recommended making to that document. I won't go into them in detail because that document is before us today for approval, and I'm sure that the Chief Financial Officer will be going through the particular changes. I will say that we did agree and support the changes that were suggested by staff. We also reviewed and discussed non-union and senior staff wage comparisons with comparable agencies, and found that our wages are within the range of comparability there, so we were comfortable there. And then finally, we received a briefing on the Regional Climate Smart Communities Program. This is a project being led by Metro to look at ways that this region can become more sustainable in the ways that we grow and develop, conduct business. trimet's going to be a very key player in that activity. A major part of the focus there is to increase transit share relied on by our region. So this is something that we'll continue to follow and have input into. This has come before MPAC, and I'm the board's representative to MPAC, and MPAC has had 2 or 3 discussions about this just in the short time I've been representing trimet there. So this is a continuing effort that we'll want to keep ourselves apprised of. So, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Director Prosser?
Impact would be what?
Sorry, the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. It is a board of elected and appointed officials that meets every other week, and its charge is to advise the Metro Council on policy matters affecting the region. Thank you for the
Thank you.
I think you need to invite Director Stovall.
I'm busy.
You're on.
Any other questions for Director Prosser? Okay, good, thank you. Let's move on then to the Committee on Accessible Transportation. Dr. Bethel, you have a report for us today?
Thank you, Mr. President, board members. You have the report before you as well as a copy of the minutes from May 15th. There are additional things to report. We do look forward to continuing working along with the CAT committee and those new members who will be coming aboard, hopefully here very soon. With that concludes my report for the day. I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Director Bethel. I would just point out again, as the board member pointed out, that we do have the minutes from the March 20th meeting, and those are in the packets, and I believe available online. Is that right, Kelly? These minutes as part of the agenda? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to get a full report on the activities of the Committee on Accessible Transportation, they can go online and actually read the entire report. It's quite a few pages and very, very thorough. So again, thank you for the report. Any other questions? Okay. Let's move on then to the state of TVMs. And for those in the audience who don't know what that is, that's ticket vending machines.
And if I could ask Chris Tucker to come up and, as perhaps as he's doing, Mr. Board President, I think we just a few quick words of introduction. We have been taking some very significant and rewarding steps recently in terms of increasing the reliability of our TVMs. This is following on some past board actions to actually authorize the replacement of 129 of our most ancient machines, if you will. That's an effort. This effort at reliability is an effort that will never be done. It will always require a great deal of diligence and work. And I'm very pleased to have Chris Tucker, who's the Director of Revenue Operations, to provide us an update on where we are with those improvements and those fixes. And again, I congratulate him for his very diligent work on this effort over the last few months, as he's absorbed this whole function from a series of other functions around. So we've consolidated the ticket vending machine efforts under Chris's direction. So, Chris?
Thank you, Neil. Thank you to the board for the opportunity to give the update. I believe you have a handout in front of you for ticket vending machine board meetings. So I'm going to provide an update on the state of the TVMs and the progress that we've been making to date. On the second slide, I thought we'd take a step back and we'll look at fare revenue overall. If you look at fare revenue according to this pie chart, you're going to see that we have a forecast for FY13 that will come in around $113 million. So it's a pretty significant piece and big number overall. But the fare revenue by channel is important to note. If you look at the biggest slice of the pie, our retail outlets, our grocery stores, such as Fred Meyer, Safeway, Albertsons, New Seasons, is about 36% of all of that fare revenue. So the biggest piece. The next slice in biggest is the bus fare box revenue at about 22%. And close behind that is our employer programs at about 22%. The ticket vending machines represent 20% of our revenue year-to-date, fiscal year-to-date. It's an important number, but it is the smallest of the channels for the customers. Just wanted to put that into perspective at the highest level on the TVMs overall. On the next slide, I want to give an overview of the ticket vending machines. So if we dive a little deeper, we have 213 ticket vending machines in operation right now. We want to put into context what those machines are, because there really are four types. As Neil noted, we have an old generation of TVMs, and those are what we call Type 3s. They're a full-service machine. That means that it takes cards, bank cards, it takes coins, it takes cash. These machines are 10 to 15 years old, and they are past their useful life, and we are getting rid of them as fast as we can. There are only about 17 left. Of the Type 4 fleet, those are card-only machines. We have 61 of those. They're approximately 5 years old. And by card-only, that means they only take bank cards, and while that's an important piece of equipment, it has 62% fewer moving parts than a full-service machine. It's quite a bit easier to maintain a machine that's just taking a card and spitting out a ticket. Of our Type 5 fleet, they're also about 5 years old, but those are full service, so they take cash, coin, card, everything. We've got 33 of those, and again, about 5 years old. The Type 6 fleet is the newest, and as of today, we have 103 of those in place, and they have replaced the 120 that we had for the Type 3s. So 17 left. All of those will be replaced, according to the schedule I'll show you, by the end of June. So overall, wanted to give you that picture that that we have upgraded these machines. The Type 6s, while they are new, they have a rebuilt bill note acceptor. So we've gone and upgraded that bill note acceptor for all the latest bills that the U.S. Mint issues. So the latest fancy bills that they give, it needs to make sure and accept those. And it has a full rebuild kit within those new machines. And to dive too deep into the card processing, I wanted to frame the complexity. These are more than just a standalone machine on a platform somewhere that's unattended, that just takes bills and spits out tickets. There's a whole infrastructure to support these, and wanted to walk through a little bit of that complexity. And there's a diagram here, just a brief overview, that for a customer to interact with that machine, several things are going to happen. One of those is the transaction goes to several servers that manage that transaction. It then flows to a payment processor router, which then goes to a card processor entity, then goes to a bank, then goes all the way back to the machine, and the ticket comes out. It's important to note that there's a big infrastructure to maintain. So when something goes wrong, we have to have a very coordinated effort to identify as swift as we can what happened to that ticket machine, whether it be at the machine or in the process, in the network, at the bank, etc. So on the next slide, I wanted to dive right into the Type 6 upgrade. These are the Type 3s, the old ones, that we've now upgraded. And this schedule simply illustrates where we're at in that replacement. Again, 103 have been swapped out as of now, and the remaining will be swapped out based on the highest fare evasion citations that are issued by station. And again, these will all be replaced by the end of June. And this graph basically just shows the little green bar is how many were replaced by month, and the big blue bar at the end of June shows you that we'll be fully completed with the project. The next slide has to do with reliability, and this is a critical component for us. We have a goal of 95%, but we want to put that into context. It's an important number that we put a lot of focus on, but really what that means is that 95% of the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we expect the machines to be 100% functional. That means 5% of the time, something could be wrong with that machine. Maybe the bills aren't accepted, or the coins aren't accepted, the cards aren't accepted, or it's out of service. And as of late, in the last few months, we're grading ourselves harder than we used to. And we've learned by doing some informal field surveys that there's opportunity to close that gap between the customer's experience and what the system reports as reliability. As of last month, we were at 90% reliability, so we're below our mark. Month to date in May, through some improvements we'll talk about here, we're now at 93% reliability, and closer to 94% in the last week. So we're making great strides to get where we need to be, and we think these are important improvements and really good progress in a short period of time. Overall, you've got the large complexities of the system that I mentioned before, but there are other variables with these machines in their unattended environment. We wanted to point out that it's a rough environment overall. Things can go wrong, whether that be extreme temperatures, hot and cold, whether that be vandalism that happens to the ticket vending machines. It could just be an old wrinkled bill someone pulls out of their pocket and tries to stuff it into the bill note acceptor, or even wet bills can be a problem for any type of a bill note acceptor. While we have very high quality bill note acceptors, things can go wrong, and that's what we wanted to point out, that it's a tough environment, but our goal is to respond and get the machines up as soon as we can. Same day, we want machines back up and running. The next slide I won't spend too much time on, but wanted to just touch on what are some of the things that we're doing. What are these process improvements? Overall, there's been a focus on the parts inventory, what I'll call the supply and logistics, and we've centralized the review of these under one person to keep a close eye to make sure we have everything that we need. a tremendous focus on data analytics. So we're taking all of the event logs out of these TVMs, which generate about 100,000 event logs a day, and we're really diving into that to look for patterns and trends that can help us identify software and hardware issues that can occur or that we expect can occur. We've taken some really difficult to fix TVMs that have been down for weeks, even months at a time, and instead of trying to piecemeal and solve it one issue at a time, we're putting our most experienced techs out there with direct supervision, and they work together to find a solution and fix the machine before they come back to the shop. As of now, all of those machines are back up and running, and as of today, we have no machines that have been down for more than a day. We've also found that we need to replace worn card readers. While it's hard to determine if they're worn or not, we know that customers will try to swipe their card and it won't work the first few times, and if they bend it a little bit, maybe it'll work. We want to put all that aside. As we identify worn card readers for bank cards, we will replace those as well. We've fine-tuned some informal field audits, which really help us to bridge that gap between customer experience and machine reliability. And what's been really useful is a coordinated monthly meeting. We're putting all hands on deck, and what that means is that we've got the vendor of the machines, the maintenance department, IT, and finance all coordinated in monthly meetings to make sure that we've got all the brain power we need and to look for any gaps in the process, whether that be hardware, communication, software, or vendor-supplied servers. As far as system improvements go, these are just a few notable ones. We fixed a data issue which reduced credit card fraud from 4% to 0.3% monthly. We fixed, as I mentioned before, about a half dozen TVMs that were out of service for weeks and months. Identified software bug which impacts about 2,000 bank card transactions per month. That fix is in testing and I expect it to be rolled out fleet-wide within the next week. We've, as I mentioned, replaced now several card readers. And we've resolved an issue a few months back impacting about 400 customer bank card transactions per month. So to kind of highlight a few, these are things that we've been tackling as swiftly as we can overall. And just to wrap up with some next steps, while there is a laundry list at my desk, I will just highlight a few. The complete Type 6 upgrade is paramount for us, which will be done the end of June. We want to focus on lifecycle maintenance to address these issues before they fail. And we want to continue to do a deep dive into the hardware and software data analytics to find these issues wherever they are and get them addressed. So I just want to brief that, and I'm very happy to answer any and all questions.
Do you have some questions? Yes, please.
Chris, I'm just curious, in terms of the age of the machines and the machines where we've had problems, do those tend to be concentrated in particular areas, or are they pretty well distributed across our system?
They are pretty well distributed. We do look at part of the life cycle maintenance is we're going to focus on the number of cycles by machine. So if one machine takes 3 times more interactions or transactions with the customer, then we will address those. As we have refreshed this fleet with new machines, it's clear which ones have worn out faster than others. So it has more to do with the highest concentration of usage. So where we have the most ridership, those machines will get the most wear and tear. And there's also the downtown effect of vandalism, which is an impact.
And can you move machines? If there's a machine in a high-use area that is having problems, can you just take it out and bring in a machine from an area, maybe a lower-use area, or from inventory, and just replace it?
Absolutely. It's something that's on our horizon now to start looking at. This is, as we have replaced 103 machines, the team has become very good at uprooting these TVMs and getting them out and putting new ones in. It's something they can do in about 4 hours. So yes, it is something that we plan to do. We almost did it with one of the machines we couldn't resurrect, but we were able to get it back up and running. So that is the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for this report, which is a good report. However, I do want to ask something in reference to a follow-up about where we're getting the most infractions of tickets not being validated and tickets being written of exclusions, which leaves the police or the transit officers the ability to either determine themselves on the spot whether I will issue or not issue a ticket. I would be interested in getting some data around how often that is happening, who's getting the tickets, who's not getting the tickets, the area in which it's happening, and I would hope that you would consider coordinating with transit as to where they're giving the infractions across the system, and then making that priority to look at the maintenance of the TVMs. What I'm hearing is that where there are those issues with the ticket vending machine, of course, they're getting more and more infractions issued. And unfortunately, what I'm hearing, it is happening in the areas where there are minorities mostly. And that gives me good concern of the officers having that leeway themselves to determine whether I will or I will not. And most often in some of those cases, my suspicions is that they're being issued, but in other areas, they're not. I'm also hearing in other areas that there are times when the officers will only look and ask certain people and will pass over others and not ask them to produce a ticket or valid form of travel. I would like to also, again, it's a transit issue, but it also has to do with whether those validators are working as well. So some coordinated effort between seeing what's happening with them and what's happening with where your machines are so that we can close that gap.
And I guess my first reaction would be we can absolutely do that. We certainly can look at by platform where the highest citations are and prioritize those platforms for addressing any maintenance issues. So yes, based on the data, we can match those up, and as we build our priority lists, which start in the morning and again in the afternoon with the shifts, we can prioritize that based on where those citations are issued.
Thank you. Good comment. Okay.
Not so much about this, but thank you for the information. I just wanted to add that I'd like to suggest that on the monthly reports that we add the Transit Equity Advisory Committee update. We've met once, and there was a large representation of the community, including youth, which is great. Opal, Riders Unite, NEA as examples. Upstream Public Health. So I think it's really important. Talk just a little bit about what Dr. Bethel just said are those kinds of things that we need to address during those reports. So again, I'd like to make sure that it's on a monthly report.
I agree. We should do that.
Director Sobel?
Just a couple brief questions. Start with a comment. I mean, you look at this credit card, this card processing overview, and you look at the complexity of it. You know, it reminds me that milk doesn't actually come from a grocery store. It actually does come from a cow at some point. It's just amazing as you think about. You put a card in, and it has to go through all that process just to give me a ticket. When I think about reliability, which again is something that the ridership and our customers have said that that's key, and especially in light of what Director Bethel has just mentioned in regards to the things that he sees and has heard about some challenges with. When I look at and when I think about the reliability of a system, the average age of either rail cars or buses, and in this case ticket vending machines comes into play. What in regards to once we transition, because I know I saw kind of the transition plan that we have for going to Type 6s, what would be the average age of our ticket vending machines?
Once we go to the Type 6s?
I think our goal is by July 2013 to have the Type 3s out of the picture and the Type 6s transitioned in, and at that point I'm assuming we'll have Type 4s through Type 6s.
That's right.
And so the average age at that point will...
I don't have the aggregated number, but it's going to be probably somewhere around 2 years.
Yeah, and so that sounds like that would probably be pretty solid for an industry average.
Absolutely.
Of where we'd like to be, because that is a critical component of what we've heard from our customers and riders in regards to not just the reliability of the vehicles and the trains, but also the reliability of the entire system, which this is a component of.
Absolutely.
So that's it.
Good, thank you. Thank you. I think this is good information. I was just curious if when I look at this pie chart about where the revenues are generated, right through which venue. When we do our mobile app, do we have a desire about the distribution in the future on this?
Well, we have a desire, but we'll see how the forecast pans out. We certainly want the mobile ticketing to meet the customer's needs wherever they are, because of course they can buy it anywhere at any time. It's hard to predict exactly where they will come from. The initial beta testers, more than half of them used ticket vending machines, but that was just the beta testers, so we don't want to assume that that will carry over to the entire public. The general assumption I've made is that they will evenly come from all distribution channels that we have. And that's really more for the retail outlets, the ticket vending machines, and the fare box. But there is some indicator that it'll be more heavily focused towards the ticket machines.
Okay, that's good. All right, no more questions on this. I think we'll say thank you. And the only other comment I'd make, as long as Director Bethel has made the comments about enforcement, it may be advisable to have Harry and Commander Krebs come in and just kind of give us an update of where we are, and if there's some statistics that we could talk about to see some of the patterns of citations and just where we are. I think it'd be really interesting to get the latest information on that. I'm not saying do it next month, but I'm saying sometime soon it'd be nice to get that report. Would that be helpful?
Yes, that would be very helpful.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate it. Is there anything else, Mr. General Manager?
No, sir.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to move right into the consent agenda. And the consent agenda, the items that are on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and may be approved by the board in one blanket motion. However, any board member has the ability to remove an item from the consent agenda for consideration separately. Today we have two items on the consent agenda: the approval of the board meeting minutes for April 24th, 2013, and Resolution 1305-34 authorizing a contract with Dennis Uniform Manufacturing Company for the supply of transportation employee uniforms. So is there anything that the board would like to see removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, then, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move the consent agenda.
Have a motion?
I'll second.
Have a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor, then, of the motion to approve the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's the, any abstentions? Okay, that motion is approved unanimously. Thank you for that. That made my day, actually. Moving on to resolutions. Somebody must be a Duck fan, too. The first resolution is Resolution 13-05-35. Board of Directors acting in its capacity as a TriMet contract review board, exempting from competitive bidding requirements a contract for construction manager general contractor CMGC services for the existing light rail track rehabilitation project. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, this is again an action as you sitting as the TriMet Contract Review Board. What the action actually does is allow us to use an alternate selection method, in this case, construction manager / general contractor or CMGC contracting approach, for work associated with the state of good repair improvements that we programmed in the proposed budget for next year and the years that follow. In particular, there are in the next year switches at the 11th and Holiday area that are subject to replacement. And some other track improvements along what was originally the Banfield Light Rail line, but the blue line on the east side of Portland. As we noted, many parts of that alignment are beginning to approach 30 years old, and so there's a need to begin replacement. The notion of the CMGC selection process is, as you know, we have used this in many of our construction efforts, but in this case it's particularly valuable because what we really work with the CMGC contractor to make sure that the work is expedited, that the impact on our existing customers, since these lines are in use, is minimized both through creative design methods as well as compressed construction methods. And so the ability to really work with the contractor through that whole process will pay great dividends for our customers in terms of reduced inconvenience as these improvements are being made and these replacements of track are being made. Again, this is not award a contract, this just authorizes us to use the CMGC process. So the next step would actually be to be issuing an RFP for a competitive process for the selection of a contractor. I would also note that we have excellent record with the CMGC process. We, I believe, have saved money, and our reports After action, CMGC reports demonstrate that they've been cost-effective as well as producing, for example, very high participation of our disadvantaged business because it allows the planning of the work to take into account all of our objectives, including reduced customer inconveniences, and cost reduction, as well as involvement of our broad community. So with that, I would just also note that as part of the process, we have a public hearing. Nobody showed up to testify about that. The findings are very detailed associated with this and attached to the resolution. Essentially demonstrate that this will be a good thing for the public interest if we move ahead with this alternative approach. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, as would staff for supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Any questions from the board on this? Yes, please go ahead.
So I understand the construction manager and general contractor, how this is structured. The piece that I'm needing a little more education on is in regards to under the explanation or the title of reason for board action. This exemption from competitive bidding must be approved by the trimet contract review board. And the piece that I'm trying to wrap my mind around is this exemption from competitive bidding and how that fits into the CMGC arrangement. And so what component of that is not going to be subject to competitive bidding?
Typically what we do, if you will, the status quo course without taking this action would be a low bid procurement of this work. So we would say replace switches at whatever, we hire a designer, which we'll be considering next, develop plans and ask the contractor to price that on a low bid situation. So that's what would happen without this exemption. With this exemption, what will happen is we will actually work with the contractor and the designer collaboratively in the months ahead to develop the best design that minimizes both construction costs as well as the inconvenience of the public and meet our other objectives. Typically what happens then is that we do an independent cost estimate and make sure that there is a control on the cost and that the cost that we get out of that is competitive. In addition, the CMDC contractor would advertise and solicit competitive subcontractors for the work. So many pieces of the work will be bid individually so that we'll make sure that the price is fair and reasonable in that regard too. But the whole thing is not subject to a single bid. It's more of a process that I think more appropriately recognizes the complexity of the work and many kinds of decisions that can go into those calculations.
So from a historical perspective, like you just mentioned, historically we would have put this out for bid, got the low bid, and it may or may not have been the best arrangement or design for whatever we're trying to complete. And with this, and the CMGC arrangement is relatively new, and we've had some great success with it. You know, we're using it on the Milwaukee line, we're using it in other areas, so we've had great success with the CMGC arrangement. And so when we say exemption, the exemption essentially allows us to utilize the CMGC arrangement. Otherwise, we would have to go with a design low bid situation, which may or may not be the highest value. If I'm saying that correctly, if I'm understanding it correctly. And so this exemption doesn't necessarily say that we're not going to get the best pricing, but the exemption allows us to actually operate within this relatively new type of arrangement when we're talking construction and general contracting oversight and management.
Exactly, and I would suggest that actually these results usually do end up with the best price because of the collaboration and the different, if you will, groups working together to achieve that outcome.
You know, in some instances, you know, I'm probably pushing it a little bit to say that, but you can correct me if I am. With this CMGC arrangement, including the designer and the GC together at the start and working together throughout, I mean, we can many times, like you said, reduce overall costs because, you know, there aren't a lot of surprises. I mean, you go in kind of knowing both sides, knowing where. I could think of an instance where the designer designed one thing And essentially, when we went to build it, we couldn't get, we couldn't get 16.5-inch blocks or something like that, because they didn't make them in a half-inch. And so there was a disconnect there, and essentially we got the low bid, but when we went to build it, we could not build it, and we actually had to redesign a lot of the construction. But if you do that up front, you got the designer and the general contractor at the table. The general contractor can say, no, you can't use 16.5 blocks because they don't exist.
Exactly.
So overall, it's a better program, and this gives us the exemption that allows us to operate with this type of arrangement.
Very well stated.
Excellent.
Any other questions? See no other questions, then is there a resolution to approve Resolution 13-05-35?
So moved.
Have a motion? Second, is there any further discussion? I guess I just add that, again, want to stress that while we're getting an exemption from public bidding, it is not an exemption from public proposal competition. So it's a competitive process. I think that's the important thing, and I'm a believer in this process for many situations. This happens to be a really good one, so I'm going to be voting yes on this. So with that, all in favor then of the motion to approve Resolution 13-05-35, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Okay, let's move on to Resolution 13-05-36, which is authorizing a contract with URS Corporation for engineering design services for the existing light rail track rehabilitation project. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, so parallel to the exemption that you just approved, this would be actually the hiring of the designer that would assist us in those track rehabilitation efforts over the next years. This was, again, subject to a competitive procurement. Under this, because we have federal funds going into these, as you know, the state of good repair formula is what is really allowing us to make these investments. So these are federal funds, so under a federal procurement for professional services, we are under the provisions of what have been called the Brooks Act, which requires that professional firms be selected based on their qualifications. And it is not a price-based selection. So based on that, we advertised this, had two proposers, as you know, and those two proposers were rated. URS Corporation was rated the highest. What we began then is a series of negotiations related to the first task order. Under the Brooks Act, if we're unable to achieve a satisfactory financial outcome, then we can go down the list to the next bidder. On the first task order, we were able to find a very satisfactory outcome related to price with URS. We've worked with URS in a number of occasions. They're very expert in the kinds of track work that will be foreseen with the State Good Repair Program. I'd also note that related to DBE utilization, URS has also done a good job with us, and in the first task order achieved 16% DBE participation. We would continue to push that as each of the task orders are advanced for various independent elements. And again, what we'll see is certain work associated with the budget that you may consider later this morning that would be approved, but there would also likely be some additional work that would come in future budgets, and so that's why the task order process is used in this regard. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but do recommend your approval.
Questions, board? Yes.
Mr. General Manager, I'm a little troubled by the chart on page 2, I guess it is, where it talks about the swerve. And I understand that URS, accordingly to this, has great DBE participation. However, I'm a little bit puzzled as to how a DBE under work plan and diversity could come out less than a non-DBE. And while utilization is good, somehow I would hope that we would be working towards trying to improve the capability of DBEs. And this one here, I'm just not comfortable in how I see the grading to come out. It just doesn't have that good feeling, and I guess it's, you know, according to that book called The Tipping Point, there's just something in here that just tips me the other way that this is not good.
We'll see if we can respond to that question. Dan or Sean?
I'll do my best.
Sean Manny, who will be the project manager.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Sean Manny, the Director of Operating Projects. And I can appreciate you highlighting those numbers. And this was a point of significant deliberation with the evaluation committee. The specific materials that are required for submission are broader than your utilization, as you mentioned. And the mere fact that you are, well, weighed heavily isn't the only fact that's weighed by the evaluation committee. And in this case, we were taking two firms, evaluating them across all the criteria, but in that specific area, felt that it wasn't fair to, based on what was submitted and what was put in the to award higher points solely because someone was a DBE. Because in that case, in some ways, we were concerned that that would be penalizing non-DBE firms. So we really looked exactly and carefully at their work plan, at their specific work plan, and evaluated what was submitted there, and felt that after deliberation, which included specialists from our diversity department, that the scores as represented here were fair to all the participants and were reasonable when held up against the specific materials that were requests for submission in this proposal.
I thank you for what you said, but that doesn't get to it for me.
Understood.
All right. So I guess the question is, how's the rest of the board feeling here? I want to understand if we move forward on this, or we have some additional time to allow Director Duffel to get some of his questions answered. So now just check here with folks. Greg,
Before I get into that question, I'd have to ask staff, is there time sensitivity to this?
Yes. There's always time sensitivity. We're trying to launch a 5-year program for state of good repair and get ahead of repairs on a system, a part of our system that's past its useful life. However, this is an important question, and it's important that the board be satisfied with our deliberation about this. And I think this is a case where we would simply make time. We would hope that there would be a way to expedite that through some sort of action here, followed up by some subsequent information. If that was possible, we'd certainly do our best to bring that information back.
Based on that, if it is possible to take more time, I think it's a legitimate issue, and I'd be perfectly comfortable taking the time to do it.
how do you feel that then would go?
Well, I'm, in regards to Dr. Duff's question, if I could get a little more kind of definition of what we'd be asking them to do, that would be helpful for me, because ultimately, and I agree with Dr. Bethel in that the work plan and diversity being combined as a scoring makes it kind of difficult to look at that scoring and say, that you have a DBE firm, but it almost kind of puts both of those things in there. I understand what you said, and I can understand the concept of, maybe the work plan was better, or so on and so forth, but I think if we called out the diversity or the DBE piece in and of itself, the DBE utilization, that would give us a better line of sight on that piece of it, so that we can feel confident about that perspective. The flip side of that is even if they got a full 25 points there, that bumps their score up by 2 points and bumps them up to 81. And so I'm not sure if the total scoring is what's concerning you, Dr. Bethel, or if, without the clarity or transparency on the work, on the diversity piece of it, is what's concerning you.
Well, I think two issues there.
If I could refocus the board members just a bit. The work plan diversity considers the minority utilization throughout the course of the contract. So it's not, they're not separate things. It's not how good are they going to execute the contract. It is actually a consideration of this diversity. I don't know what the numbers are in this case, but it would suggest, A, that URS had a better work plan for utilization for diversity. And the other thing I might want to point out is even if you gave the other proposer the maximum points, it wouldn't change the outcome.
I think that's where Director Stovall is going on this. You know, based on the comments that you made in terms of the timing, I think it's an important one to understand. I think that this is a good opportunity for learning for us in terms of what is involved in the evaluations you have here, because again, the DB, the firm being a DB itself doesn't really reflect what that contractors or consultant is going to be utilizing as his team to deliver on this project. So I guess what I'm thinking is that it would be great to have that scoring and that understanding of what was put in there that would allow us to move forward. I don't think it'll make any difference in the ultimate scores you decide as you outlined here. But I think it would be a good thing for us to, again, in the interest of transparency, to be able to show that. And so I'm willing to let's just carry this over until the next meeting and allow you to view the information. So what I think we're asking for is some more detailed information on the evaluation on that particular criteria, just so we understand how the folks made the decisions and their scoring. And if there's things that we need to understand in that, please flag those for us, okay?
Understood.
You okay with that?
Yes, but for the record, could we get a motion to table this? Just
We could do that. So is there a motion to table this? Until the next meeting, let's say.
Okay. So move that we table this resolution until no later than the next meeting.
Okay, that was really my clarification, is do we table it, or do we just carry it over?
I think we should table it to the next meeting.
So I have a motion. Do we have a second then? Do I have a second? Is there further discussion then? Then all those in favor of the motion to table resolution 13-0536 until our next regular business meeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. This will be a good discussion for us to have. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 13-05-37, which is authorizing a contract with Skanska USA Building Incorporated for design build services of the Park Avenue parking structure. Excuse your own name.
Board President, members of the board, this is the result of a design-build process that we've gone through to solicit a contractor to build Park Avenue Garage as part of the Port Milwaukee project. You may recall that the Park Avenue Garage is actually sized around 400 spaces, but it also has the structural capability under the design-build criteria to actually expand that up to about 800 with additional floors, and so the foundations and the footings and structure is built in a way that can accommodate that increase. What we actually did, because this has been a very important element of community focus in the Oak Grove community, we have a very broad, diverse group of individuals involved in the RFP selection, including some of the local neighborhood representatives who've been involved in the greening of this area. And I should also note that this site is subject to, has actually received some additional metro funds in terms of actual green space work. So we've had, again, participants included Clackamas County, Urban Green, TriMet, Metro, members of the Project Citizen Advisory Committee, as well as members of the public and adjacent homeowners. So, and they were a group involved in developing the RFQ system and then actually in reviewing the proposals. We're very fortunate to have a large number of proposers and have very good proposers on this garage. And as you note, when the qualifications only were noted, there was an ordering of firms and noted in your resolution packet. The top three firms then, based on those qualifications, were asked to submit more detailed RFP